The year is 2012. The only thing illuminating your room at the dead of night is the bright glow from your laptop screen. Its whirring fans blend with the pattering of rain on your bedroom window. You told yourself you'd go to bed about 2 hours ago now, under the constant promise that it would be one last video. Now you're here, staring down another strange gem in your recommended. This time, for certain, just one more video, then you'll sleep. The year is suddenly 2004. Matt Mahaffey and his band Self are planning the release of their 7th studio album, Ornament and Crime, only for their label, DreamWorks Records, to be bought out and the album hesitantly held back from a proper release. The only place this album could be listened to up until 2017 was through snippets on MySpace and YouTube. You're now in 2007. After nearly 9 years following the release of its predecessor, Team Fortress Classic, Team Fortress 2 finally hit the shelves, bundled in a collection of games on Valve's Orange Box. It is held to critical acclaim for its adventurous art style, accessible and addicting gameplay, and impeccable world building through implementation of story and sound. 2009. After nearly 10 years since its premiere, Ed, Edd n Eddy concludes its series with the television film Ed, Edd n Eddy's Big Picture Show. It was one of Cartoon Network's longest-running animated series, set in the fictional town of Peach Creek and following the antics of the Ed Boys. Many are fond of the series' inventive and charming implementation. The Ren and Stimpy show airs for the first time, being the first of Nickelodeon's many animated series known as Nicktoons. It follows a temperamental chihuahua, a gullible cat, and their subsequent antics, using a blend of originally composed music featured on the 1993 album Idiot, and from 1997, Mario Kart 64 was released worldwide, becoming one of the best-selling games on the Nintendo 64, beaten only by the 2011 American pop punk band The Story So Far released their debut album, Under Soil and Dirt. The opening track, States and Lands, contains lyrics that carry through the whole album, those being, I'm falling in and out again. You sit in disbelief for a moment. A montage of vibrant visuals, action and sound flash through your mind as you recount what you just spent the last 17 minutes watching. Alone, not one individual thing you saw could hold a tangible link between one another. Together, however, every song, every reference was perfectly chosen and suited to a very unique, magical piece of media. The year is 2012. You've just watched Team Fabulous 2 for the first time, and you don't think you've been quite the same ever since.
I'm going to cast Exposition at 3rd level.
Counterspell.
Source Machinima is able to successfully assimilate the culture and identity of its audience and creator into an exciting concoction of visual and oral references. It uses things such as memes, cartoon sound effects, and other means of found sound to create an exciting oral space. Am I making any sense?
Nope.
Good. Today, I want to introduce you to the wild and wonderful world of Source Machinima Soundscapes. We will be analysing a variety of different Garry's Mod and Source filmmaker creations, discussing where their creators pull their sounds from, and how it ties into techniques such as Parody and Mashup, as well as early internet culture. Throughout this video essay, I will be rescoring various clips from famous Garry's Mod and Source filmmaker Machinima, combining practice-led research with interviews with creators to answer some pressing questions about Source Machinima. Questions such as, can original music work in conjunction with the sound design and visuals of Source Machinima? As well as how can the sound design in Source Machinima be applied to other pieces of media. Now, I'd just like to provide a little bit of exposition before the video essay begins proper. Means of communication and collaboration have expanded exponentially in the past 2 decades, thanks to the evolution of technology. Provided your computer can actually run an editing program, you can basically do anything you want with the tools that we're given. If we simply look at the various online communities that have grown over the past 2 decades, such as the Source Machinima community, we can really see how people have taken different inspirations and turned them into their own creations. Look no further than the invention of memes.
Dr. Octagonopus!
Despite being amateur and avant-garde, the low-quality nature of memes doesn't take from their credibility, giving them the title of Internet Ugly. As Nick Douglas would put it, it's supposed to look like shit. A meme's memorability often relies on its visual elements, or, most importantly for this study, its oral elements, which is surprisingly understudied in a lot of cases. If we look to websites like TikTok and the short-form content we find on there, we can see how sound plays a crucial role in virality. And, in my opinion, there's no form of online media that has a more intricate soundscape than Source Machinima. As mentioned before, we are about to move on to the discussion into how early internet culture, parody and mashup have affected the aesthetics of soundscapes in Source Machinima.
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
But before we get into the essay proper,
Come on!
I'd like to address a few biases that may arise in the study. The most obvious bias is that much of the analysis of these works is reliant on my own interpretation and experiences. I have attempted to be as inclusive as possible when selecting works of Machinima to discuss, but I would implore that anyone interested in the field explore it themselves and come to their own opinions and understanding. Another possible bias is that a lot of the material I'm covering in this video essay is reliant on Team Fortress 2 as source material, and as a result, a lot of the discussion may be revolving around that community. Though it isn't the focus of this study, I'd like to spend some time discussing the history of Machinima, Garry's Mod and Source Filmmaker. It won't be long, and I do implore that people go out and look at this history themselves. Without further ado, Machinima was a term coined in 1999 by pioneers Hugh Hancock and Anthony Bailey. It describes how video games and their 3D real-time environments were used to make movies, often for communities based around multiplayer or competitive video games. It allows for many of the tools once limited to larger corporations to be put in the hands of the people, allowing them to make their own content online. It also means that a lot of the budget that would go into finding a set and voice actors are removed, simply asking for players to boot up the game and do it themselves. Though budget does often accommodate for better Machinima, the deciding factor most of the time is one's ability and unique style as a creator. Most developers actually provide tools to make Machinima with, such as replay tools. Valve takes this a step further by actually creating a piece of software people can make Machinima in. Source Filmmaker was released as a public beta in 2012, which it's still in to this day, though it was internally used by Valve as early as 2005. It provides creators with the tools to film on location in various different Valve games, giving them access to official maps, models, and much more. Ever since SFM went public, there's been various different events that have allowed for creators to work with one another, such as the official Saxy Awards. As a sister program to SFM, people also make Machinima using Garry's Mod, which is actually intended to be a sandbox game. As a result, the smooth animation of Source Filmmaker is thrown away in favour of ragdoll physics. Many different animators, such as Uberman765, El Toro, and Goose Serious, have pushed Garry's Mod to its limits, using community-made tools to make groundbreaking animations. Okay. With all disclaimers out the way, let's begin our analysis into Source Machinima Soundscapes by looking at Parody, Mashup, and early internet ugly aesthetic.
Naturally. Let us move! Yes! Move! Madam, say! I'm coming for you! Cow! Pardon me. I'm waiting. You know, hiding won't save you. Of course. Excellent.
Alert! You must defend our intelligence.
Scout! Move! Yeah! Oh, hey! You suck!
Now.
And another thing, you're ugly.
Do you ever watch a piece of media that's so impactful that you think about it for years to come? Something so avant-garde, so strange that it clings onto you symbiotically? Well, if you were Ken Fisher, you'd probably answer with a video you saw in 2003 of a bunch of snakes and badgers dancing to techno music. He claimed that the clip was highly addictive, yet oddly unexplainable, letting it loop and repeat for many, many times after it was meant to finish. He immediately took to his blog and shared it with his colleagues. There is something alluring about this low-quality, avant-garde content constrained by bandwidth. Mistakes are celebrated and rejoiced in, strangely. It's this internet ugly aesthetic that is a key foundation to machinima as a whole. Small online communities pride themselves on avant-garde, bizarre content. Ugliness is not a constraint, it's not something to be criticised. It's something freeing, it's something human. Accidents are seen as trophies to the viewer, it feels more personal for some reason. Strange avant-garde depictions of different scenarios are seen as relatable, such as in Rage comics or the even more alluring Bazinga comics. A fairly common use of the internet ugly aesthetic would be in YouTube poops, where different clips based on meme and pop culture are chopped, manhandled and edited into a strange avant-garde mess. As implied by the name, YouTube poop is meant to look like shit, but it's a part of the culture, it's a part of the allure. Nick Douglas discusses internet ugly in the context of machinima. He discusses how creators have been given the tools to make virtually anything they want, often using a sandbox environment like GMOD or SFM. One of the most popular examples of internet ugly machinima would be in Nope.avi. The short takes place in Team Fortress 2, and the viewer will immediately recognise the character running to the screen as the engineer from the same game. His hard hat shoots up in a strange straight line before he utters the phrase "nope," and his head immediately shoots up to meet the hard hat before walking off. It feels wrong, it feels strange, something isn't quite right, it's jarring, it's a little bit ugly, but that's a part of the charm. It's proof that a community of people or a single individual even can make something, anything that's enjoyable and relatable and remotely interesting. An even earlier work of GMOD Machinima, titled Half-Life Full-Life Consequences, makes use of the pinnacle of internet ugly content: shitty fanfiction. The narrator delivers the poorly written story with typographical errors and all in a dramatic monologue, the visuals representing these spelling mistakes in the typical ragdoll feel of Garry's Mod. The blunt sounds of ragdolls hitting and clanging against different surfaces is melodramatically accompanied by Ren and Stimpy production music. The low quality visuals, the slightly fuzzy audio and the superb storytelling are all internet ugly manifest. It also shows us another important element of Source Machinima Soundscapes: parody and mashup. Parody has been a fundamental part of art since it was conceived. In Machinima, its most simple manifestation is in the inclusion of movie or TV references, sometimes getting to such a level of meta as to reference back to other works of Machinima. A more specific use of parody in Machinima is the reference to video game mechanics. Whilst you're playing a video game, you don't often think about how respawning affects the world that you play in, but in Nemesis Blue, this is actually tackled directly as a part of the story through the respawn machine. As we can hear in Half-Life Full-Life Consequences, there's some slight incongruency between the bright and vibrant music of the Ren and Stimpy production tracks and the realistic, gritty visuals of Half-Life 2. Despite this, it still seems to work in a strange way. The genre bleed that comes from this contextual incongruity is integral to the form of mashup that takes place in Source Machinima. Incongruence as humour is seen as far back as the writings of Schopenhauer and Kant, in which they discuss the violation of our perceptual patterns resulting in something strange and unnatural, which is humorous to us. The assimilation and devourment of different sources of inspiration is integral to art in the digital modern age. This type of art often parodies, inverses, or critiques the art that's being fed into it in a way that benefits both the consumer and the consumed. John Oswald chose one such way to make art like this in the form of plunderphonics, also known infamously as audio piracy. In the liner notes for his Grey Folded album, Oswald describes how plunderphonics is a self-conscious practice of referencing different recognisable musical works in a way that questions notions of originality and identity. Musical quotations in this form of mashup are meant to be recognised. They are intentionally reused to be heard by the right audience at the right time. Though it's likely that the soundscapes of Source Machinima were not made with Oswald's work or the wider assimilation of parody and mashup in mind, this is still important context to our analysis later on. Are you still with me? Good. Congratulations, soldier, you've made it to the fun part of the video essay. Going forward, we'll begin our deep dive into Source Machinima Soundscapes, applying what we've discussed so far to examples of different GMOD and SFM machinima, and looking at even more specific examples of parody, mashup, and other techniques that can be applied.
Gentlemen, who will join me?
Let's do this!
Let's go! pushing. Push that cart forward. Heck no. We will push until there is nothing left to push. What? Oh. Move.
Are there any pieces of source media that kind of stand out to you in particular? Anything that you're inspired by?
Well, going back a little bit, End of the Line is still just an amazing piece of art for me. A lot of the older Saxy stuff is still really interesting to me, like Little Guardian Pyro. It's amazing to see how far SFM films have gone, that we've reached the point that MSS Blue can be a thing and be as popular as it is.
Starting with things like Freeman's Mind, which is basically like a voice-over of the gameplay, but from like a perspective of the main character. And then there's like this a lot of like really great videos like Team Fabulous 2 or That Intelligence, and there's really a lot of like classic old videos. I just can't like name them all.
I think I'm kind of towards the older age of people in the source media community, so I think a lot of my inspirations are probably a bit older. For the longest time, it was a lot of old school film composers. I'm talking like John Williams down to Bernard Herrmann, that sort of thing. So like I've listened to a lot of Danny Elfman soundtracks, a lot of Gregson Williams soundtracks. Bernstein is great. Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner are like top tier for me. As far as movies, three of the biggest major inspirations are probably Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Emperor's New Groove, and probably Treasure Planet at the top. When I was growing up, it was a lot of prog rock, so I listened to Rush and Dream Theater a lot. I really liked chiptune. I listened to a lot of Ocarina of Time, Kingdom Hearts, Yoko Shimomura, Motoi Sakuraba, and Nobuo Uematsu for Final Fantasy VII. I think that's probably my most listened to game soundtrack of all time.
My main source of inspiration is probably stuff like anime and manga, specifically things like Gurren Lagann. And I also like funny movies like Naked Gun or Hot Heads. And as for the games, there's like a specific part in one of my animations that's specifically meant to mimic the gameplay from Dead Space.
After 2 chapters of hyping up Source Machinima, I think it's only fair we jump straight in. I've spent quite a while thinking about a good way to categorise Source Machinima Soundscapes, and after a while of thinking, I think I finally found 2 good terms to use: Cinematic Source Machinima and Plunderphonic Source Machinima. This system serves to rank Source Machinima soundscapes and how much they borrow from and utilise pre-existing music and sound. It's less of a strict binary system and more of a spectrum, with the extremes being as follows. Cinematic Source Machinima refers to works of Garry's Mod and Source filmmaker Machinima that apply sound in a more cinematically conventional sense. The soundscapes in these works are often easier to fit into categories like diegetic and non-diegetic, with much of the content being either original or closely related to its source material. This is not to say that contextual incongruity doesn't take place in these soundscapes, but that it only really takes place with sound from the source material. A few well-known examples of cinematic Source Machinima would be in the works of the Winglet, HoovyTube, and Fortress Films. All three of these creators stick closely to Team Fortress 2 for source material, with much of the lore from the games being incorporated into their own stories with their own unique twists. A lot of these machinima use original voice acting and sound design in their work, such as Fortress Films and HoovyTube. Some of them, especially the Winglet, make use of the voice lines, sound effects, and music directly from Team Fortress 2. Some of these creators, in particular the Winglet, make use of originally composed music, such as in The Red, the Blue, and the Ugly, where the score blends traditional cinematic writing with the 60s blues style of the Team Fortress 2 soundtrack. Externally sourced sound is still used in these soundscapes, such as HoovyTube using video game music or progressive rock music, and Emesis Blue pulling from public domain movies and traditional songs in their soundscapes. Plunderphonic source machinima refers to quite the opposite, soundscapes that feature a variety of different sources from beyond the world of the game, such as different video game soundtracks, meme audio, film and TV scores, pop music, and a variety of different examples. The line between diegetic and non-diegetic sound is also blurred, such as in the use of inconsistent sound design on objects and music that strangely and literally follows the action. A lot of short-form Gary's modern source filmmaker Machinima makes reference to popular memes at the time, such as Silent Man Joe's short SFM animations that blend TF2 soundscapes with meme audio. One such example would be how he mixed Jack Black's Peaches with Sniper's titular catchphrase, Piss. Longer form plunderphonic source machinima such as Dat Intelligence or El Toro's Scout's Amazing Adventures series are great examples of the cartoonish twisting of audio and the use of incongruent music. The way sound is repeated unnaturally, the way sound clips are played over action that wouldn't usually call for it, music from different genres and different sources playing in conjunction with each other, it's oddly jarring in a charming way. Though a lot of what we've discussed in Chapter 2 mostly applies to plunderphonic source machinima, there are still plenty of cinematic examples that use elements of parody, mashup, and internet ugly aesthetic. Let's go over some examples of different techniques that animators use in these soundscapes, starting with one of the better known examples of sound in source machinima.
There's a lot of interesting reuse, glitching, and recycling of existing assets in various forms, like stuff from the games or stuff from other source media, and kind of like making these interesting mashups to make stuff sound good. One thing I have noticed over the years is people taking dialogue lines from source games and stitching them together to form new dialogue. That has gotten so much better. Just from like a dialogue editing perspective, it's to the point now where it's kind of hard to tell if someone's done that or not.
Voice mixing likely originated from the world of YouTube poop. The splicing and isolation of voice and sound, such as the titular go-to Mama Luigi, likely affected the treatment of voice in many different source machinima. Another likely origin of voice mixing is in the mismatching of voice commands directly in-game. For example, players of Team Fortress 2 who choose the Heavy, or the more friendly variant, the Hoovy, can spam the line "Put dispenser here" in succession with other commands to create the titular "Put this" line. Voice mixing can come in a variety of different forms. Some creators prefer to take their voice lines and add them to their works in a raw, unedited form, albeit in a new context. Some creators prefer to slightly modify these voice lines and change their context or meaning, an example of this being in Soldier's rant at the end of The Red, the Blue, and the Ugly. Some of these creators make entirely new sentences out of mismatched voice lines, and some creators create absurd abominations that no human could ever imagine creating. The use of voice mixing ultimately results in characters vocalizing in an uncanny and unnatural way, as different intonations are stitched together and hybridized in a new form of communication. Cannibalizing sound to create new semantic pathways is actually quite important to Mashup in the digital age, with the works of Miriam Breeze and her Mezangeli, one of those is probably right. Miriam Breeze's language takes different words, symbols, and even computing languages and stitches them together to create a language constantly in tension with itself. Let's begin to look at a few examples of voice mixing. In Costamoinen's first Gardener Heavy video, we see multiple references to real-life flora said by the Heavy, such as Monstera deliciosa and Ficus elastica. The Heavy, of course, doesn't have any reason to say this in-game, so therefore Costamoinen's delivery of these lines feels unconventional as he stitches different words together. In El Toro's 10,000 Years of Evolution, we see new types of fauna being introduced, such as the spouse or the spacre bleu. The use of nonsense words in voice mixing is very common, often as a means of rationalizing the strange visuals we see. In the case of the engineer, he's trying to rationalize the strange new world he's found himself in. Later in the short, El Toro shows us another example of voice mixing. When the scout says, "Need a fire here," we instead hear a long scream when he says fire. Usually, he may think to splice and include the scout's fire, fire, fire voice line. However, El Toro instead mixes the line with one of Scout's critical pain screams to make it sound more unnatural. He also does this in Bloody Bodybuilding when the soldier calls out for the scout. The use of voice mixing to create unnatural noise goes beyond just unusual enunciation. In Scout's Amazing Adventures by El Toro, we can hear how voice lines are warped into unnatural screams and sounds that come from each character. In Part 3, and then later in Part 5, we can hear how the different characters' screams are taken and repeated beyond their usual length, sort of like the sounds technology makes when it malfunctions. Another example of this would be in El Toro's Full of Sandwiches video, in which the soldier emits a strange series of vocalizations as he runs away from the medic. The use of distorted sound in transit is surprisingly common in Source Machinima, with another popular example being in That Intelligence. Paula Harper discusses repetition's use in music as being paradoxical, with many scholars calling it progressive or being associated with movement, with others calling it stasis or regression. We see examples of both in Source Machinima, with the unnatural stasis in Scout's Amazing Adventures and the movement and progression in Full of Sandwiches. Voice is probably one of the most important elements of Source Machinima Soundscapes. It's the most direct form of communication that these machinima can take, breaking from the limitations of voice command parameters through repeating, splicing, and transforming the voices they use. Surrounding the use of voice in these soundscapes is the use of sound design, which will be our next area of discussion.
I just try to use sparingly the funny sound effects, like the sound effects from Mad Dad and Eddie. Also, when it comes to the animation itself, I usually animate without putting direct sound effects, because I kinda believe if you the sound makes everything more punchy, but if you're actually animated stuff that is already punchy enough, then if you add the sound effects after, it will be even better.
The use of sound can vary wildly from machinima to machinima. Some creators prefer to use cartoonish sounds and lean into it, whilst others prefer simply for the sounds to complement the visuals. As mentioned before, Plunderphonic Sound Machinima uses a variety of different sound cues, often incongruent or at odds with the visuals, to blur the line between diegetic and non-diegetic sound. This can be done quite subtly or quite liberally, using a variety of different effects, such as the personification of objects through sound, cartoonish effects, and of course through reference to memes. Across both parts of Pootis Engage, there are only a few moments where meme audio is made reference to. Part 1 sees the use of the infamous Let Me In audio, as well as later using the goat screaming audio that's been used well into the early internet. It is unknown whether the characters could actually make these noises in universe, hence the blurring of diegesis and non-diegesis. Regardless of the diegetic implications, these sounds have a direct correlation with what's going on screen, that being the fear and terror felt by the Area 51 workers as they see their eventual demise. Another example of what I would call extra contextual sound is in Costaminen's second Gardner Heavy video called Jolly Rancher. As the engineer rides away on his tractor, we can hear the noises of a horse whinnying and galloping under the revving of the engine. This is a direct tie to the engineer's Wild West aesthetic, as well as framing him as the sheriff or protagonist going to confront the soldier, at this time seen as the antagonist. A final example would be in That Intelligence, where various expressions or movements are given melodramatic flair through including extra sound effects, such as the sound of glass shattering when the spy realizes an enemy player is in front of him. This is a rather obvious parody of how sound is used in various cartoons like Ed, Edd n Eddy, with its use of over-the-top impact noises and other nonsense sound that plays throughout the cartoon. In real life, as I'm sure you've probably noticed, it is impossible for these sounds to play during these actions, which again blurs the line between diegetic sound design and non-diegetic soundscape when used in these shorts. With voice being a mostly diegetic application of sound, and sound design often straddling the line between diegesis and non-diegesis, music in Source Machinima comfortably finds itself in the non-diegetic soundscape, and will be our final area to cover. I suppose when writing tracks for these animations, are there any things that you use as inspiration or any kind of aesthetic qualities that you would keep in mind whilst writing?
So it does really depend on the story and the visuals of it, because if you're working on something that uses Dota content, that's going to sound pretty different from something that's using Team Fortress content. A lot of the time I take a lot of inspiration from the TF2 soundtrack, very 70s jazz funk, or however you would describe it. I haven't really thought about how you'd describe it. I like to work pretty motivically, trying to reuse themes whenever I can. So like on Winglets, the Red, Blue, and the Ugly, we established a lot of themes for characters or moments. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but there's a scene in that movie where the camera reveals there's a bunch of robots working on something. And in that scene, it's something that I wrote myself, but we quoted the track right behind you, the spy theme from the Meet the Spy, the dramatic one. And then as soon as the robots get revealed, you hear the main melody from the Man vs. Machine trailer when you first see the robots. It just gets thrown in every so often because, you know, we're trying to call back to where it all came from.
When it comes to like how I exactly pick the music, I'll just probably stick to my gut feel. If I actually have like a specific scene in my head and bind it to the song, I would like put a song first and like try to animate over it. But sometimes I really don't have ideas to put something on the background, and I just pick wherever sticks to it. I don't want to stick to specific music genre. There's like, in fact, I wish to incorporate more things I haven't like yet put in my animations. Like I want to use some of the Ace Combat orchestral OST, which is so epic it is actually became a joke on itself. Sometimes it's just more like an ambient almost. You don't really have to put as much effort to like make it work in that way.
One thing that's been really nice for me is I've gotten a lot of trust from the animators that I've worked with, so they kind of just let me do what I think works best. I'm not just writing it and sending it over the fence. I'm writing like the first half, sending it to them, asking them what they like, and then making tweaks and continuing further. So there's a lot of back and forth until we hit the mark.
Music plays quite a few different roles in Source Machinima. It can go from being used as simple background music to directly tying into and often affecting the narrative. In cinematic Source Machinima, music mostly plays the role of solidifying the aesthetic of the animation. As mentioned before, the Winglet both borrows music from Team Fortress 2's soundtrack and uses originally composed music based on the soundtrack to solidify his aesthetics. Music from Source Machinima can also incorporate parody elements, with creators either using pre-existing parody music or creating their own. For example, ST Black ST goes out of their way to make several original parody songs that put TF2 voice lines over popular music. In one short by Anomade, we can hear the use of Mastergur's mashup Sexy Whack to actually tell a story. The engineer enjoys building for his team before he is auto-balanced to the other team and later finds enjoyment in neglecting the job he is now expected to do for them. Though not low quality or ugly by any means, the scavenging for voice and audio clips used in mashups, similar to voice mixing, evoke the same level of intimacy as in Internet Ugly aesthetic. Like how Anomade has adapted Massacre's mashup into a story, music can serve to deepen or expand upon the narrative of Source Machinima. In parts 2 and 3 of Scout's Amazing Adventures, El Toro uses music by Bring Me the Horizon and Periphery to represent the Blue Soldier, who is portrayed as a bit of a metalhead. Metal music is also directly incorporated into the narrative later in part 3, when the soldier demands a solo battle with the spy, and solos from the tracks Follow the Signs and Beneath the Waves are featured. Another example of incorporating external music into the narrative is in Emesis Blue. The Machinima makes reference to a 1931 film named M. When the scout is being kidnapped, a clip from M is being played on the television, where the killer is whistling the tune In the Hall of the Mountain King, which he only whistles when he's about to go for the next kill. Through including this oral reference, Emesis Blue is assimilating and making a direct reference to the movie M. Certain songs are used in Source Machinima animations to make direct reference to the narrative themselves. Sino uses Absolute Territory in the intro to Putus Engage Extreme, which relates directly to the task at hand. The overarching story of Putus Engage is for the two heavies to get a hold of some, and I quote, anime ass. This is mirrored by Absolute Territory's context of being a song desiring a woman, in particular the lower parts of her body. Certain lyrics like, and I can't believe I'm quoting this, rename your thighs to the Gaza Strip, being particularly evocative of the comedic story of this series. Originally composed music is also used in conjunction with the narrative. As discussed previously, a lot of music found in Plunderphonic Source Machinima comes from other video games and media sources. In Scout's Amazing Adventures, El Toro features two versions of his originally composed track, Soapy Mash, inspired by the aesthetics of Grant Kirkhope and the Banjo-Kazooie soundtrack. Many early video games, like Banjo-Kazooie, have those soundtracks used in Source Machinima, so for El Toro to develop this further by writing music in this style shows an advanced means of assimilating previous culture and media into Source Machinima. The two versions of Soapy Mash used, those being a day version and a night version, bookend the series in parts 1 and 6, creating a satisfying sense of conflict resolving and our characters returning to the normalcy after their journey. Alright, so with that, we've discussed every single thing there is to do with Parody and Mashup in Source Machinima. There is definitely nothing else that we need to discuss, nothing about any negative implications of using Source Machinima on YouTube. Nothing at all.
First of all, picking music is kinda hard for me because there's like a really lot of things I wish I could use, but I just can't use them because there's like YouTube content ID and like YouTube won't like if I use like literally anything, so I have to like, I really like to stick to the game musics because they usually like don't have this problem. It never really happened right after like I'm finished the video. It usually happens somewhere in the mid process. Like I recall like trying to like bind the animation to like the music, but I found out the music I can't use it because of that issue.
It's a given that in the modern day, a creator that parodies, mashups, and generally borrows from other content may eventually find themselves in a copyright-related conundrum. When faced with legal action following the distribution of their Grey album, which combined the Beatles' White album and Jay-Z's Black album, artist Danger Mouse claimed that it was not their intention to breach copyright law. They simply wanted to make art. The boundaries of the public domain sometimes are not entirely clear, and content creators are bound to stumble and trespass on private property and subsequently face legal action. People often criticize copyright law for being outdated in the context of digital art and machinima. When discussing Canadian copyright law, Graham Reynolds highlights how machinima creators can be held under scrutiny for substantially taking from video games by using assets such as scenes, models, or characters. There are workarounds offered by copyright holders that allow for machinima to be made under certain conditions. Blizzard and Microsoft, for example, offer licenses to creators to make machinima using their IPs, so long as it's non-commercial and features no vulgar or sexual content. Valve has a similar video policy asking for use of their content in videos to be non-commercial. In viewing a character as both a story and a brand, it is understandable that a company would wish to keep tight hold of how these characters are used. Someone could go on to make politically charged content or otherwise offensive content using these characters, or accidentally make something that predicts the next narrative arc, which can affect the branding of the game as a whole. The issue on YouTube is amplified significantly. Many creators have complained about the flaws in the website's Content ID system, often getting false claims. Despite being under threat from Content ID and wider copyright issues, Source Machinima is still a bustling and thriving community. The creators are able to make the most of the scavenged media they find and incorporate into their works, finding new and inventive ways to incorporate both old and new media. In the penultimate chapter of this video essay, I'm going to analyse 3 particular pieces of Source Machinima and analyse how they've incorporated all the techniques we've discussed up until now. But first, let's have a little bit of fun. In languages, there's this fun thing called a commutation test, in which changes in the signifier lead to changes in the signified. Basically, if you change one small contextual clue, it makes the entire thing different. This is pretty easily applied to music, as Jack Pierce shows in his video.
What many people may not realise is that music is an incredibly important part of film and television. If used correctly, it can enhance the emotions of any scene. For example, the music you're listening to right now is making me seem like the coolest, suavest guy in town. Get that wrong, it sounds like this. What many people may not realise is that music is an incredibly important part of film.
As my own form of commutation test, I've decided to recreate 2 different soundscapes in the style of Plunderphonic Source Machinima. Both of these clips come from shocking moments from the films they're from. The first clip is from MSS Blue, in which the medic emerges from Archibald's casket to gun down the spy who betrayed him and Soldier. The original soundscape leans into the tension and the shock of the moment, using an uncomfortable synth that sounds almost like grinding metal to accompany Medic's gaunt, undead appearance. Second clip is from Infinity War, in which Tony is forced to watch his protege Peter Parker turn to dust. No music plays in the original clip, giving a somber sense of regret. My goal with this is to undercut any and all tension present in these scenes. Plunderphonic Source Machinima, mostly through to its natural humour through incongruence, makes it difficult to maintain emotions like horror, fear or sadness without having an underlying sense of comedy. I wanted to try and show this by recreating both clips' soundscapes in a tongue-in-cheek style. Let's listen to the first clip.
I would be taking his place as chairman of the board to end this treason and corruption once and for all.
Holy Mary, Mother of Joseph.
In the use of Ren and Stimpy's production music, I hoped to give the scene the same amount of melodramatic flair as present in that style of music. I chose Floral Fury from the Cuphead soundtrack to play later on, as I felt it could lend itself to the stampeding crowd in a more humorous way. I also used several cartoon and meme sound effects to enhance the comedy, such as Ed, Edd n Eddy sound effects, the Wilhelm screen, and the My Leg guy from SpongeBob, to name a few. For the Avengers clip, I actually made 3 different versions. In all clips, I used a number of cartoonish meme sound effects when Doctor Strange and Peter Parker get dusted, such as the Mario 64 painting noise and the Change the World, My Final Message, Goodbye sound effect. I also interspersed a few different sound effects to help break the tension. Where the clips differ is in their music choice. Here's the first clip.
There was no other way.
How could you do this?
I don't feel so good.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Sir, please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
As you can hear, the track Icarus from Deus Ex Machina is played in the background. This track is also used in Team Fabulous 2 at a similarly low point in the story. I wanted to take this music and apply it to a similarly serious scene with similarly silly SFX. That's too much alliteration. I did later realise, however, that this might be too serious for the scene, so I instead decided to try a few other musical options, such as the following.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Sir, please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
He did it. For this clip, I decided to use music from the original Sonic games, in particular the Drowning and the Game Over music. The use of these 2 tracks in this clip turns the sense of macabre failure that is felt into more of a oops, better luck next time. As one final alternate take, I decided to try using Ren and Stimpy production music, as you will hear now.
I don't feel so good.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Sir, please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
done this. I personally felt that the music in this clip was a lot more melodramatic than the Sonic music. I felt that the solemn, tense vibe that was given off by Tony mourning his friends was replaced by a dramatic, cartoonishly tense underscore as Tony sits and contemplates. I do hope that this little commutation test was enjoyable and insightful to listen to. Without further delay, I'd like to discuss the first of our 3 case studies. Given that we've discussed the modification and mashing up of sound from outside of Source games, what happens when Source Machinima is able to twist and distort sound while staying faithful to the source material? I would argue that Anomade's Project Skybox, also known as Interloper, pulls this off quite well. In the game Half-Life 2, there exists an ongoing mystery that has never been solved. Anomade's Interloper is an alternate reality series based around an ever-growing mystery within the Source engine. It starts with our protagonist discovering messages on a board pointing towards mysterious graffiti in the Ravenholm level of Half-Life 2 that, when inspected further, reveals a mysterious console command that runs mysterious replays of various Source games. Some of these replays appear to be from the perspective of various highly intelligent AIs that are having their existence covered up by strange figures with umbrellas. The story is still very much unravelling, with a bustling community working around the clock to solve every new mystery that Anomade throws at them.
Another currently running thing, I don't know if you've seen Anomade's Interloper series.
Oh yeah. I was watching it literally like yesterday as well, it's crazy.
yeah, it's so interesting because like first of all, I love ARGs. Like now we're at this point where we're not just releasing shorts, where we now have an alternate reality game that's using the tools. And it's also playing on so much just like history from the Source engine and all the jank that the Source engine has and making it seem like a ghost story. It's really cool, and I'm excited to see more that comes out of it. Full disclosure, I'm technically helping with it. I made some music for it, but I don't know really what's going on with the plot or stuff coming up. So like, I think I can be objective about that part.
Interloper is mostly shot as a series of documentary-style videos on Anomade's main channel. Though there is some content on side channels, it often finds its way onto the main channel through these documentaries. The music in these documentary-style videos is often atmospheric in nature, with occasional swells during title sequences or moments of epiphany within the investigation. The ambient, brooding nature of these background tracks bleeds almost seamlessly with the ambient noise found in the Source games Anomade is investigating. Many people have talked at great lengths about the eerie ambience present in every Source game, especially whilst playing maps on single player. There is the feeling that something is there with you, despite being completely alone. Anomade uses this to their advantage, with the narrative of the story being that someone is very much there with you, monitoring your investigation. Much like the mystery at hand, the ambient music is always sitting just out of reach in the mix, definitely there with you, but concealed in some way. The moments where the soundtrack swells are grandiose and indicative of the progress made in the investigation so far. The track featured at the end of Part 5 is almost celebratory, triumphantly playing as Anomade explores past the confines of the prison the Umbrella people have forced him into, a moment of triumph and control in an investigation ultimately beyond understanding. The use of sound design adds to this terror. The replay scenes are particularly terrifying, in part thanks to the Source engine eerie ambience as mentioned before, but also in their minimalism and use of sound exclusively from the Source engine. Anyone who has viewed Interloper will immediately recognise the terrifying bell noise that plays whenever an Umbrella person has entered the replay. Given that the soundscape is so scarce at these moments, these bell noises almost blur out at you like a warning alarm, despite being so delicate. It's this subtle fear that makes Interloper so terrifying. Anomade also does something akin to voice mixing, though its application becomes a lot more terrifying when you look at it in context. In the elusive Misty.wmv video that finally surfaces in Part 6, the line "Don't fiddlesticks, what now?" is used in 2 different ways. At first, it begins to play and is then cut off immediately after. The second time, it plays at the same length, but in quick, overlapping succession. Alone, this doesn't really add much to the scene, though if you consider that this is actually a debug sound that's used in Source games when missing sound is called upon, it becomes so much more terrifying. The implication here is that the AI being captured is calling out in distress, confused as to what is going on, but because it's trying to communicate outside of the confines of the Source engine, it comes out as nothing more than a debug sound. By actually adhering to the communication syntax of the Source engine, Anomade is able to create something far much more unnerving. Interloper is still very much an ongoing series, and has plenty of room to develop. As the story continues, I look forward to seeing how Anomade can use the confines of the Source engine to their advantage and tell a truly terrifying story. On a comparatively lighter note, Italian Ninja's Requiem for a Pizza is split up into 2 parts, with part 1 coming out in 2016 and part 2 in 2021. It follows the story of the Team Fortress 2 demoman and him deciding to become a pizza delivery person, and how on his very first job he manages to lose the pizza he's meant to deliver. Him and his new friends must then go on a journey to get this pizza back. Hollywood wishes it had storylines like this. The soundscape of Requiem for a Pizza is bountiful in that nearly every technique we've discussed thus far is used and pushed beyond what's typically found in these works. Let's tackle the use of sound in a similar order to how we did so before. Italian Ninja uses incongruent voices in a variety of different ways, one such method being the titular voice mixing. A more conventional use of voice mixing is used in part 1 during Scout's flashback, as he talks through his plan to be shrunk down and therefore cute and appealing to his crush. Just like in El Toro's work, voice mixing is also used to make nonsense sounds. In part 2, Demoman makes a series of strange vocalizations whilst attempting and failing to cut the rope from the pizza box. These sounds are made from a combination of different laughing and pain sounds from the Demoman in Team Fortress 2, occasionally repeated, distorted, and pitch modified to add to the jarringness of the vocalizations. Voice lines are also distorted and edited for comedic effect, most notably in several of the Demoman's lines in part 2. Vocal distortion and effects similar to a cheap microphone peaking are applied to Demoman's voice to emphasize his aggravation and chaotic disposition to a lot of the events on screen, such as when he says "let's go" and "come on." Incongruence through voice is also used in the mismatching of different vocal styles for each character. At several moments throughout both parts, characters will randomly have voices that do not match with their previous vocalizations. For example, the sniper's sudden and strange delivery of the line "cactus" is equally as jarring as when the cactus blows up behind him immediately after. Later on, the female scout character delivers the line "sorry" in the voice of the Half-Life male civilian. Original voice lines were also recorded for Requiem for a Pizza, both adhering to and differing from the pre-established voice lines. During the death run scene, in part 2, the demoman and the female sniper are given voice lines reminiscent to young children over the microphone in a multiplayer game. This is a direct reference to the multiplayer game phenomena in which inexperienced and loud children will put themselves on the microphone, clearly in a place where they are not meant to be. Incongruent original voice lines are also used at the end of part 2, in which the female sniper and scout character are introduced to their new adoptive daughter, who was living inside a present the entire time. The daughter, in this scene, speaks in an overly manly tone, voiced by Italian Ninja's friend Caboose. The female scout and sniper are also given equally as manly voices in response to this. Italian Ninja also uses a lot of incongruent sound effects. For example, the male sniper is accompanied by a series of low-quality piercing microphone distortions as he speedruns through the death run map, based on people in video games with low-quality microphones screaming or spamming loud audio down the mic. Italian Ninja also uses a series of cartoonish or abrupt sound effects to further embellish scenes. For example, she adds cartoonish blinking noises at several moments where the characters are blinking in confusion at what they're seeing. There's also an over-the-top crashing noise and a typical cat yowling noise as the spy discards his box in part 1. Strange, disconnected voices often pop up at multiple points in both parts, such as the sudden "good job" in response to spy dodging Demoman, the crowd's applause at Scout falling out of a tree, or the emotional response as Demoman is comforted. Music is also applied in a number of interesting ways. For the most part, the tracks used are on a scene-by-scene, event-by-event basis. None of the tracks chosen make a return at a later point in either part. What is interesting, however, is in certain one-off tracks that are used. There are several track choices that make references to memes or videos from other areas of the internet. For example, Sniper and Demoman's strut to a cover of Crazy in Love in part 1 is actually based on a 2D League of Legends animation called Brom's Pleasant Bot Lane Escapade. Both the original short and Italian Ninja's parody represent the same situation. Two characters effortlessly fighting their way through a large crowd of people as they happily dance along to the music. It strongly evokes classic early internet ugly content that depicts characters dancing in an overly happy way. Italian Ninja also makes great use of originally composed music in both parts. In part 1, we see a brief emotional track written by Raxo being played over Scout's flashback scene. Part 2's implementation of originally composed music by Soundsmith is particularly interesting. In the commentary video, released shortly after Part 2's upload, Soundsmith discusses how they made reference to tracks from other media, both media referenced in Part 1 and original media that Soundsmith sourced himself. The first part of the track makes reference to Demoman's somber walking scene in part 1, in which a track called After My Fate is used. Here, Soundsmith references the track in the glissando cello line. The second, driving part of the track makes references to multiple different musical inspirations. The Before Takeoff section is inspired by the track He's a Pirate from Pirates of the Caribbean. The second, post-takeoff part of the track combines some music that played when the Demoman and Sniper first met and set off, called Constructive Cynicism from Sims 3, with elements of the Test Drive track from How to Train Your Dragon. In using original tracks that reference pre-existing music, Soundsmith and Italian Ninja have both avoided the plague of copyright protection, as well as incorporated the music into their narrative. Requiem for a Pizza is a staple of modern Source Machinima for many, many reasons. There's a reason why the fanbase was happy to wait so long for Part 2's release, and that's thanks to the dedication and hard work of its creator and her fellow collaborators. Incongruence is used perfectly to bolster the humour of various scenes, deliberate internet ugly aesthetics are called upon and evoked for a similar effect, and different musical inspirations are assimilated and used to benefit the narrative. There's one more piece of Source Machinima that I feel would be a crime not to mention. Put on your Texas 10 gallons and get out your acoustic guitars. We're going to Mario Kart. Where would we be without the work of Kitty0706, also known as Colin Wyckoff? He created Team Fabulous 2 in 2013, inspired by a typical game of Team Fortress 2 Deathmatch. It takes place on a well-known community map inspired by Mario Kart and follows the hijinks of several mercenaries. It takes a sudden turn halfway through though, following an intermission from Colin himself playing Matt Damon's Conspiracy, as an evil entity aptly named Spunky the Imp unleashes several different video game characters to unleash havoc upon the map. It's up to one engineer wearing one iconic hat to save the day. With music, nonetheless. Well, where do we start? The use of voice in Team Fabulous 2 surprisingly lacks a lot of elements of voice mixing. Most of the vocal samples are unspliced and used in their purest form, aside from a few minor cuts. This probably adds to the charm of the project, while not with it being inspired by a Team Fortress 2 game, meaning it may have been a stylistic choice to keep the voice lines uncut. Where I think Colin's use of voice excels is in his limited but specific use of certain externally sourced lines. Much like how Italian Ninja called upon her friends to voice certain comedic moments in Requiem for a Pizza, Colin rather wholesomely calls upon his younger brother to help voice a few moments parodying the phenomena of younger children voicing in games they shouldn't be playing. There are also a few uses of voice, which I doubt Colin thought much of at the time, that I think are pivotal to the use of incongruent sound in Team Fabulous 2. Near the beginning of the conflicts at the start of the round, we hear the scout yell the line, "Get that motherfucker." Later on in the short, before the guitar-playing engineer saves the day, antagonist Spunky the Imp can be heard yelling, "Fuck 'em up." Whether intentional or not, I think the use of incongruent voice demanding a call to arms against an aggressor is a particularly important bit of continuity, especially given the weight of the fight at the end of the video. Colin also makes use of chaotic melodramatic soundscapes to further improve his action scenes. During the large opening fight sequence, a cacophony of weapon sound effects, explosions, impacts and cartoonish embellishment can be heard throughout the entire sequence. During this moment, it's highly likely that Colin was parodying the intensified continuity of modern cinema action sequences. Mateus Stork gives this the title of Chaos Cinema, which often prides itself on having a sensory overload of visuals full of shaky cam, flare and spectacle. Scenes evocative of Chaos Cinema often revolve around panic and hysteria, in which the visuals and soundscape fight to gain the attention of the listener. Team Fabulous 2's chaotic fight scenes certainly seem to parody the action sequences of Chaos Cinema in their overwhelming soundscapes, quick camera cuts, and highly spectacular action. Where Colin differs, of course, is in his use of incongruent, cartoonish flair, typical of this style of Source Machinima. Throughout the entire video, actions are accompanied by extra sounds that often, again, blur the diegetic line. What I think Team Fabulous is most famous for is its use of music. The musical choices are heavily linked to the narrative and identity of the video, with the main character literally changing the world of the animatic through the power of music. The soundtrack constantly flip-flops between humorous and dramatic, in a way mirroring the ups and downs of a Team Fortress 2 match. We see the use of more commonplace Source Machinima tracks like Ren and Stimpy production music, alongside more personal choices that evidently came from Colin's bank of favourite music. The diegetic implementation of these tracks helps make the music choice feel more personal. We're hearing what the characters are hearing as they celebrate and impact the world around them through the transformative powers of music. The climax of the video quite literally would not work if not for the inclusion of the track States and Minds by the band Story So Far. In fact,
Alrighty then.
You just ain't doing it right.
The year is 2024. It's been a while since you've indulged in that weird itch you get at the back of your head. You entertain your childlike indulgences, going down a spiral slide of weird YouTube videos that go from making your jaw hang open in surprise to guffawing until your chest hurts. Sound cues rattle around in your head for days after you watch them, allowing a smile to curl to your lips every time you remember the nonsensical term that came from that character's mouth. Eventually, you find it again. The video that caused that spark all those years ago. You've grown a lot since then, but these kinds of videos always stuck with you. You've never quite been the same since watching it, and you think you're thankful for that. You've been able to find and connect with so many other people who were changed the way you were by art like this. You've intermingled and made friends out of people within this community. You've grown with them, and you've created alongside them.
I mean, it really all goes back to when I started playing Team Fortress. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and my roommate started playing back in 2011, so that was after the game was free to play.
I mean, my first encounter with TF2 was literally, I was like very young, and I was gifted a pirated orange box.
I actually didn't see all of the short films that Valve made until after that first MVM trailer, and then I realized how much content they had made. And then I saw someone die to a Saxy, I think, in the game in like 2013, 2014 or something. And I was like, what was that? So I did some research and found out that there was the Saxy contest. And I've been wanting to be a film composer for a while, so I thought this was like the perfect way to try and combine my two like biggest obsessions at the time.
And I actually started to make some kind of source content stuff kind of long ago. I was just making some kind of different posters, just this kind of weird stuff, some buildings, but yeah. But then I kind of like was making some kind of animations kind of inspired by stuff I seen on YouTube. Like I made a parody to the GMOD idiot box. It's lost to history, it wasn't really that good. It was like 10 or 12 years ago.
At that time, the biggest people I met were Andy Thibault, Sedimentary Socks, and Elmi, and they were making some films for the 2014 Saxy. Saladathon, which means tuna salad in French, met me and started talking about Turbulence because he was working on it with Dunkel. And I wasn't the only person that they were talking to for music. I was just the first person who said, yeah, I'd love to help you. And from that point on, I just kept meeting more and more people online. Most of these people I've never met in person. And I just kept working on SFM stuff. So it's just kind of all history at that point.
Like 6 years ago, I made like a GMOD animation that I never released. It's still lying somewhere on my Google Drive. In general, I just, when I'm doing my stuff, I'm just trying to like manifest weird ideas that just accumulate in my brain over time.
Do you think these pieces of source media have had a big impact on the communities that form around it, like in Team Fortress 2 and beyond?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think everybody knows how impactful just the Meet the Team shorts were.
It's actually a rather interesting topic because I don't really played any Nintendo games like Mario and stuff, but a lot of TF2 animators been using these in their videos, and that's kind of weird, because when I hear like that specific song from like a Banjo-Kazooie game, I think of TF2 video specifically Heavy and Scout thinks they are birds.
The biggest thing that all of this media has done is kept people engaged. Without stuff like the Saxy Awards, or all the GMOD shorts that came out, or heck, even just Nope.avi, I don't think Team Fortress would still be as big as it currently is. And especially if you look at things like TF Connect or Tip of the Hats, just to see like the length that people go to utilize that media to even just better the world, is really something crazy to see.
I do believe that specifically for TF2, this is like one of the main reasons TF2 is so popular right now. Like I don't imagine TF2 being so popular like this time since the release if there was no like this kind of stuff. These funny memes kind of become part of TF2's DNA.
I only hope the creators of Source Machinima knew, and know now, how impactful every creative decision they made would be. In the ever-expanding digital age, the impact of art is seen on a far wider scale, meaning we can see how a creation goes on to affect the wider internet. How a creator decides to vocalize a character's thoughts or pick music for a scene can go on to affect countless creations after them. Creators are constantly learning from one another, assimilating tens of hundreds of different works and creating a beautiful collage in homage to a community spanning millions of people. This community means a lot to a niche yet expansive number of people, and I truly believe it's one of the most influential forms of machinima in the 21st century. I look forward to seeing how the community continues to grow and evolve. In the words of Kitty0706, keep doing what you love.